All right, second graders, here we go with chapter 4, part 2 of the Bad Table Manners Cure. We have a little boy named Christopher Brown, and he has really bad table manners. So he wants he's been invited to a dinner at his friend's house, and his mother is very worried. So she called Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. Oh, Lester doesn't use a trough, said Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. That's the whole point. Lester has the most beautiful table manners you've ever seen, and I want him to eat in the kitchen table with Christopher. You'll be very surprised. Lester will teach Christopher how to eat. But it sounds fantastic, said Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. I know, says Mrs. Brown. I know, said Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. Every mother I send Lester to has the same feeling. But let me tell you that once you have had Lester in your house, you won't want to let him come home to me. I always have that trouble. Everybody adores Lester and wants to keep him. Oh, by the way, he likes to sleep on a clean blanket on the basement floor. Also, he likes to have the basement door left open so he can go out for his exercises after dark and when the neighbors are asleep. Have Christopher stop by after school and I'll send Lester over. Mrs. Martin just returned him this morning. But what does he eat? Said Mrs. Brown. Exactly what Christopher does, except much larger portions. Oh, yes, I almost forgot. Lester is very fond of coffee. He takes cream and sugar, and he often drinks as many as 5 cups at a meal. Now, don't worry, Mrs. Brown. Fix Lester a nice bed on a clean blanket by the furnace, and I'm sure he'll solve all of your problems. Goodbye. Mrs. Brown went up and got a clean blue blanket out of the guest room closet with many misgivings unfolded and put it on the floor beside the furnace in the basement. She looked at the clock. She had 10 minutes before she could expect Christopher. She made some cocoa with some whipped cream, fixed 2 plates of ginger cookies, one much larger than the other, and polished two red apples. She got out spoons and napkins. Then, remembering what Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle said about Lester's manners, she took 2 of her good linen dollies and put them on the kitchen table. At exactly 3:30, there was a knock at the back door. There stood Christopher, who usually never knocked, and a large white pig. Christopher said, Mother, this is Lester, and we get to keep him. Oh, he's fun. He's so smart. He knows everything. Don't you, old boy? Mrs. Brown said, Come in, Christopher and Lester. I have some cocoa for you. Christopher said, Oh, boy, and dashed over the table and began gulping his cocoa. Lester walked daintily into the kitchen, closed the door carefully behind him, climbed up and sat down across the table from Christopher. Christopher was jamming his mouth full of cookies and washing it down with cocoa. Lester looked at him, then took one cookie carefully between his split and his front hoof, and ate it very slowly with tiny bites. He picked his cocoa cup up with his hoof, and after one small sip, put it down carefully, while he patted his snout with a napkin. Christopher stopped eating, or at least stopped chewing, to watch Lester eat. Christopher's mouth was open but full. He had whipped cream on his upper lip, crumbs on his chin. Lester reached across the table and gently closed Christopher's mouth. Then he wiped the whipped cream off of his upper lip and the crumbs off of his chin. Christopher was delighted. He said with his mouth full, Gosh, you're so smart, Lester. Lester put his front hoof across his lips and pointed to Christopher's full cheeks to indicate no talking with a mouthful. Christopher looked up at his mother. Isn't he smart, Mother? Isn't Lester wonderful? Lester looked over at Mrs. Brown, and she was sure he winked at her. It usually took Christopher about 3 1/4 minutes to gag down his cookies and cocoa. This day, either because of the excitement of having Lester with him, or perhaps because of a good example set by Lester, Christopher was still eating at 4 o'clock. Mrs. Brown came downstairs to clear up the cocoa and things, and was surprised to find that Christopher had only finished and Lester was about halfway through. Mrs. Brown asked Lester if he'd care for some cocoa, some more cocoa, and he nodded his head and handed his cup of cocoa to her. Christopher said that he didn't care for any more and began eating his apple. Crash, crunch, smash, gulp. Lester reached across the table and took the apple away from him, got down off the chair, went over to the drawer in the kitchen, took a knife and cut Christopher's apple into small sections, cored each section and put them on the empty cookie plate, and handed the plate to Christopher. Christopher put a whole section of apple in his mouth. Lester shook his head at him, reached over and took one section and took a very small bite. Chris gulped down the first section and took another, but this time instead of stuffing it all in his mouth, he took one small bite. Lester nodded approvingly at him. At 4:30, both Lester and Christopher had finished their cocoa and apples, and Christopher took Lester down to the basement to show him his bed. Lester looked carefully around the furnace room, straightened out several wrinkles in the blue guest room blanket, then nodded at Christopher to show him the bed was all right. They went into the game room. There was a red tennis ball on the floor. Lester picked it up and threw it at Chris. Chris caught it and threw it back. Lester caught it neatly in his mouth and then took it out with his hooves and threw it at Chris. They played ball until it was time for a mystery cowboy radio programs that Christopher listened to every evening. He said to Lester, "Gee, Lester, I hope you don't mind that I always listen to a bunch of keen radio programs at 5 o'clock. Of course, if you'd rather play ball, I don't have to." Lester shook his head, turned and pointed to the fireplace. There was a nice little fire laid. Christopher said, "Do you want me to light the fire, Lester? Do you?" Lester nodded. Christopher struck a match and lit the paper. Lester stretched out on the hearth rug and closed his eyes. Christopher crouched down by the radio and listened to his programs. It was very peaceful. When Mr. Brown came home from work, Mrs. Brown told him about the invitation to dinner to meet the Thompsons' famous brother Charles, about Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, and about Lester. Mr. Brown was skeptical about Lester being able to teach Christopher table manners. "Talk about the blind leading the blind," he said, and he laughed loudly. Mrs. Brown said, "Hush, Philip. Lester's right down in the basement, and he really has the most beautiful manners I've ever seen." All right, and that is the end of Chapter 4, Section Part 2. Make a prediction. How is Lester going to help Chris even more? And I'll see you next time.